The first time anyone in New York paid attention to Nora Bennett was the night Camilla Ashford tripped her at the Plaza Hotel. Camilla's stiletto had caught the ankle of a woman already leaning across a mahogany service tray. The tray dropped sideways. $1,200 worth of baccarat crystal hit the floor beside the velvet rope that separated the room's richest predators from the staff hired to keep them fed. The sound cleared a circle of conversation 3 tables deep. What happened next was the part they would talk about, for years afterward, in rooms where Nora's name had never before been spoken aloud. Damiano Vitale, a man whose signature had ended more careers than most diagnoses, caught Nora by the waist, lifted her off the wet carpet, and set her down in his lap, as though the chair had been holding its breath for her entire life. Camilla Ashford went the color of skim milk. A senator dropped his cigar in his lap. The string quartet fumbled a chord and never quite recovered it. Nora looked up into a face that had made grown men check their pockets for the wallets they had left at home, and Damiano Vitale asked her, in a voice the bones remembered, whether she was hurt. 6 weeks earlier, Nora Bennett had been invisible in the most expensive sense of the word. She worked 14-hour days for an agency called Hawthorne and Vale, whose name was stamped in gold on the wallpaper of every room they were hired to make beautiful. Nora was the senior coordinator. She had been for 3 years. Her signature sat on manifests that, taken together, would have paid her rent in Queens, her student loans, and the outstanding balance on her mother's surgical care at New York Presbyterian. The staff respected her. The clients tolerated her. The men who signed her checks had met her twice and remembered her not at all. She was not a small woman. She was not going to become a small woman. There had been a salad era. There had been a treadmill era. There had been a worse era, after her father's funeral, when the only thing she could keep down was protein powder and a particular kind of rage that came from being told, twice a week, that the body she lived in was an apology for a different one. Then her mother got sick. Nora was 21. She took 3 catering crates on each shoulder one October morning and discovered that the body the fashion magazines had been telling her to hate had become, without asking anyone's permission, the body that got the job done. She wore it like armor now. A size 22 she could defend. The morning of the Ashford Vale Gala at the Plaza, Nora was running on 4 hours of sleep and a stale almond croissant eaten against the service elevator wall. Her mother, Margaret Bennett, had called at 6. The hospital had moved Margaret's second hip replacement up to the following Wednesday, and the copay had moved with it. Nora had done what she always did with numbers she could not afford. She moved them into the back of her mind where she did not have to look at them until the end of the month, when they always moved back into the front. It was a system. It was not a solution. Grace Molina, her best friend and the only other coordinator at Hawthorne and Vale who still called Nora by her first name, intercepted her at the linen closet at 11. Grace was rumpled, anxious, and holding an iPad full of seating changes. Table 9 just lost a Saudi prince and gained a hedge fund pirate with a known allergy to our foam chasers. Also, the florist sent the wrong peonies. Also, the senator technically running for office wants his name spelled correctly on the lobster tags. She paused, looking up. Also, you look like you slept in a cab. Nora took the iPad. I did sleep in a cab. Sort the prince's chair into the Dubai delegation and stretch the table by 2 inches. Move the senator's tags to the side opposite the mayor. Replace the peonies with the museum whites from the upper cooler. Don't tell the florist. Grace whistled low. You should be paid double. Nora smiled, without any teeth. I should be paid at all. By the time the floor opened, Nora had solved 3 crises, declined 1, and repositioned an ice sculpture using a hotel cart she had borrowed from the loading dock. She was good at this. She had been good at it for so long that it no longer registered, even to her, as an accomplishment. It registered, instead, as wallpaper. Around 10, the staff said a single name in the manner of a prayer that had been known not to be answered. Vitale was downstairs. The announcement was not theatrical. There were no whispers on the west side of the room. There was only a small contraction in the air itself, the way a city goes quiet 3 blocks before a storm breaks. Servers set their trays down a 1/4 inch lower. Bartenders paused mid-pour. Senator Montgomery, who had opinions about everything including the temperature of his beluga, went suddenly and completely interested in the silver fork in his right hand. Damiano Vitali did not enter buildings. He occupied them. He came through the East Service Hall with 4 men in suits that did not puff over their waists, which had been a deliberate tailoring choice. Nora, who spoke cloth, recognized as a warning. He was wearing charcoal. His tie was the black of a moonless night. His shoes were polished to a mirror. His left wrist carried a Patek Philippe worth more than most of the cars in the Vale line. He was tall in the way coastlines are tall. There was nothing theatrical about it. He did not need to be looked at. He simply was, and the room recalibrated around him in real time. He did not check in with the receiving line. He did not pause at the velvet rope. He walked straight to the cantilevered booth at the far end of the room and sat down as though the room had been holding the chair for him its whole short life. Nora, who had been detailing the senator's caviar at table 4, did not look up. She had been instructed, by Gerald Thorne himself, not to. Gerald was the head of Hawthorne and Vale. He stood 6'2" on a good carpet. He had the kind of haircut that announces its own price. He had a yacht, a mistress in Soho, and a long-running private arrangement Nora had spent 3 years pretending not to see in the spreadsheets. Gerald did not like Nora Bennett. He respected, in his brittle way, the way she ran his events. He did not like the way she did it from a body that he had been conditioned, by his own social set, to find offensive in rooms full of women who had paid surgeons to look the way he wanted them to look. She kept her head down because Gerald kept her head down. It was the system. It was Camilla Ashford who broke the rule Nora had not known she was still keeping. Camilla was a rail-thin daughter of a steel magnate's third wife, with cheekbones sculpted last spring and a voice designed for the back row of a boardroom. She had been chasing Damiano Vitale for 2 seasons and had, until tonight, failed to get within 10 feet of his elbow without her father being asked to leave the room by way of apology. She was wearing a strapless emerald column that fit the way a glove fits a hand seen through a window. She was angling again for the cantilevered booth, and Nora Bennett was standing in her path. "Excuse me," Camilla's voice cut the air the way a scalpel cuts gauze. "You are occupying the center of the floor in a way that suggests you have not seen a mirror lately." Nora stopped. She adjusted the silver tray against her shoulder. She made herself, with the discipline of a woman who had been making herself small for 31 years, smaller still. She stepped back. She pressed her own hip against a marble column to make room for the column dress to pass. Camilla did not pass. She paused. She looked up and down Nora's body with the same expression an appraiser gives a property that has come up in foreclosure. Honestly, there should be a threshold. They should enforce a perimeter. She shifted her weight, slightly to the left. Honestly. She walked away. The emerald column flickered in Nora's peripheral vision and was gone. Nora stood for a moment with the tray against her sternum. The trembling she had expected did not arrive. 45 seconds, a long time ago, she would have cried in the linen closet. 20 minutes ago, she would have clenched her jaw and moved on. Tonight, for some reason Nora could not fully explain, she simply stood there, very still, and decided she was finished rearranging her own body to make Camilla Ashford more comfortable. She went to deliver the caviar. Camilla, meanwhile, had wedged herself into the adjacent chair of the cantilevered booth, giggling at the 4 men around Damiano and entirely failing to engage Damiano, who was reading something on his phone with the expression of a man counting down the minutes until he was permitted to leave. Nora arrived at 11:30 with 2 bottles of Macallan 96 on a tray that weighed more than Grace Molina. She set the first bottle down without incident. She began to set the second. That was the moment Camilla moved her left foot 4 inches to the left. It was a small movement. It was an intentional movement. The heel of Camilla's Louboutin caught the toe of Nora's sensible black flat, and Nora's ankle folded sideways at an angle it was not built for. The tray left her hands. For roughly the size of one breath, Nora Bennett was falling forward over a $4,000 mahogany service table in the cantilevered VIP booth of the most expensive hotel room in New York City, with a bottle of scotch the price of a sedan, leaving her grip in midair, and her entire future, Margaret's surgery, the rent, the loans, the small dignity she had built and rebuilt like a sandbag wall every Monday morning, leaving with it. Then a hand caught her. Not her arm, not her wrist. her waist. The hand was enormous. It closed around Nora's middle with the certainty of a harness. It did not ask. It lifted. The bottle hit the table. The glasses hit the floor. Nora's center of gravity pivoted, and before the sentence of her fall could finish itself, she was being lowered. Set, actually, as if on a stage the world had decided to build under her in the half-second she needed it most, directly into Damiano Vitale's lap. Her full skirt pooled around both of them. Her hip hit the inside of his thigh. Her shoulder met the wall of his chest. He did not smell like cologne. He smelled like gunmetal, dry-cleaned wool, and a man who had killed something recently and washed his hands afterward. He held her there with one arm locked around her waist, and the other resting with proprietary weight on the outside of her thigh. The room went negative. Conversations did not end. They died. Cigars hung in mid-air, mid-flirts, mid-bribes. The senator's fork clattered into his plate without his noticing. The string quartet lost its place, found it, lost it again. Camilla Ashford's hand was still on her wineglass, halfway to her mouth, frozen. The most expensive room in New York was now staring at a plus-size event coordinator sitting on the knee of the most dangerous man in Manhattan. Damiano Vitale did not look at Camilla. He did not look at the mess. He looked down at Nora Bennett, and his eyes were the color of black ice, and his voice, when it came, was the kind of voice the bones remember. "Are you hurt, Signorina?" Nora's hands were trembling. Her heart was trying to leave through her throat. "No," she said. "I am so sorry. You were tripped." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The single sentence rewrote the story in front of 400 witnesses, 4 senators, 3 billionaires, and a woman who had been trying for 2 seasons to share Damiano Vitale's table air. He lifted his gaze. He did not turn his head. Camilla saw the eyes land on her, and went the color of skim milk again. "I saw the foot," he said. "You moved it 4 inches to the left." Camilla opened her mouth. Whatever was about to come out of it did not, because Damiano spoke over the silence the way a man speaks over a firing squad. "Apologize to her, loudly. This time, I could not hear you the first time you insulted her body, 20 minutes ago, near the linen closet. Find that volume again." Camilla's father, Richard Ashford, materialized at the edge of the booth. He was a steel magnate made, at this moment, of wet paper. He had an outstanding obligation with the Vitale family, Nora knew from a year of carrying manifests, in the neighborhood of 9 figures. He leaned in and spoke in a voice meant to be heard by no one. The voice was heard by everyone. "Darling," he said, "apologize to her, now." Camilla swallowed. She opened her mouth and produced a whisper the size of a cotton ball. Damiano did not blink. "I said louder." "I am sorry." It came out shaking. It came out wet. It came out of a face trying to remember what it had looked like before this minute. "I am sorry I tripped you. I am sorry I said things about how you, I am sorry." Damiano held her for 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then he nodded. Once, the way a man nods when an invoice has been paid in full with interest. He turned his head to Richard. "Take her out of my city by morning. Tomorrow you will receive a notice about your outstanding obligations with this family. I expect them cleared by Friday. Personally." Richard Ashford, whose net worth fit comfortably into a Goldman account, took his daughter by the elbow and was gone. The crowd closed around them like water. Nora's earpiece crackled to life. Gerald Thorne. "Nora, get off Mr. Vitale's lap. This is a disaster." "Get off him. You are fired. You are an embarrassment. You—" Damiano lifted the earpiece out of her ear with 2 fingers and crushed it in his fist. He did not look at Gerald. He did not acknowledge the sentence at all. His voice, when it came, was something quieter than a sentence. It was a sentence with a foundation underneath it. "You are not fired," he said. "You were never going to be fired. You were, however, never going to work for Hawthorne and Vale again." The sentence landed in Nora's chest like a coin dropping into a meter that had been out of order for years. "What do you mean?" she said. Gerald Thorne materialized at the velvet rope. He was red. He was sweating. He was the kind of furious that lives at the bottom of a man who has just realized he is about to drown. "You," he spat at Damiano. "Vitale. You cannot—" "She is fired. Termination effective immediately. I am calling security." You are calling no one, Damiano said, in the voice he saved for death warrants. Your call log for the last 18 months is in the hands of a man who is, at this very moment, walking it to a United States District Attorney. Walk away, Gerald. Now, or I will make the walk short. Gerald walked. He did not look back. He was almost running by the time he reached the service corridor. The senator at table 4 walked out 2 minutes later. The hedge fund pirate walked out 4 minutes after that. The string quartet packed up. The staff began to pull the linens. At midnight, black Suburbans pulled up to the service entrance. FBI. The warrants were still wet when they went on the doors. Nora watched from the second-floor service corridor as men in windbreakers walked Gerald Thorne out in flex cuffs. She watched the same men carry boxes of paper out of the office she had worked in for 3 years. She watched her own signature float past her on a manila folder. She could have been in those cuffs. But Damiano had been right. The warrants had been coming. Hawthorne and Vale had been awash for Cesare Bruno for 3 years, and the FBI had been building the case for 9 months, and Damiano had been waiting for the right night to extract the one signature he needed removed before the doors closed. She was sitting in the back of a Rolls-Royce Phantom with the man who had lifted her off the floor. The tinted windows kept the city out. Inside, the cabin smelled like leather and cold air. "You knew," she said. "You knew the warrant was coming." "I knew." "Why me?" It was not a question. It was the sentence a woman asks when she suspects she will not like the answer. He turned his head. He looked at her the way the sea looks at a coastline at night. "Because your father was owed a debt. Because Cesare Bruno owes me a war. Because you were sitting inside a building that was about to be burned to the ground, and I have already lost 1 Bennett to that man's appetite." The sentence did not move. It just stayed, in her chest, where she understood it would stay for the rest of her life. "What do you mean?" she said again. "The 1 Bennett." "Thomas Bennett," Damiano said. The name fell out of him, the way a held breath does. "Your father, the largest importer on the East Coast. He was also a friend of my father. Cesare Bruno framed him for the disappearance of a Vale shipment in 2009. He ruined him. He foreclosed the warehouse." Damiano did not finish the next sentence. He did not need to. "Your father's death was not an accident you inherited. It was a project he financed. The men who—" He paused. "Cesare Bruno killed your father, Signorina, with a forged manifest and a small fire, and you have spent the last decade paying rent on the wreckage." Nora sat in the back of a Rolls-Royce with the city's most dangerous man and felt the ground move under her. She did not throw up. She did not weep. She sat, and the man waited. And outside the windows of the car, Manhattan rearranged itself, the way Manhattan always does when a new poison enters the bloodstream. The car did not take her home. The car took her to a penthouse on the top floor of a building Damiano Vitale owned, in a city he had spent 10 years quietly buying. She was given a room with a view of the river. She was given, over the next 4 days, a complete accounting of her father's last 3 years, including the forged manifests, the planted evidence, the warehouse fire that had been officially ruled accidental, the foreman who had been paid to lie about it, and the small handwritten note, in the margin of the original autopsy, that Cesare's family doctor had added at Cesare's request, and that Cesare had assumed would never surface. She was also given a question. "I am acquiring the Beaumont Hotel," Damiano said on the 4th morning. Over coffee neither of them drank. "It is the centerpiece of Cesare Bruno's legitimate portfolio. If I can run it well, I can fold his empire into mine without firing a single bullet. I need a director of operations who knows how to read a catering manifest and who cannot be bought by his money. I have watched you work for 6 months, Signorina. You did not fawn over the senator. You did not let Gerald rest his hand on your shoulder. You have not lost a single event. You," he paused, "are not afraid of rooms. You have a gift for rooms." Nora looked at the coffee cup she had not been drinking. It had begun, of its own accord, to matter. "I am an event coordinator," she said. "I am not a hotelier. I am also a size 22. I do not look like the kind of woman a hotel like the Beaumont expects at the door." "You look," Damiano said, "like the only kind of woman I would put there. The kind who has to be carried past 400 people to be noticed. The kind who has been ignored into competence. The kind who—" He stopped, again, the way he had stopped saying what mattered most. He simply looked at her. Take the job, Signorina. Nora took the job. The rebranding of the Beaumont was to happen in 4 weeks. Nora Bennett, newly minted director of operations, was given an unlimited budget, 3 assistants, and a man named Fabien whose entire personality was rolled sleeves and opinions about waistlines. Have we considered, Cross ventured, on the 7th day, hovering at Nora's elbow with a measuring tape and a glass of water that was not for her, dimming the silhouette, a T-length column, something that, he gestured vaguely at her midsection, the way a person gestures at a stain they would rather not name, de-emphasizes. Nora looked at him. She looked at him the way her mother looked at a hospital bill she had been overcharged on. Cross, she said, are you aware that my entire success in this job has been that I have not once made myself smaller to make a room easier for a man to look at? Cross opened his mouth. Out, said a voice from the doorway. Damiano Vitale entered in a suit the color of dried blood. His eyes were still black ice. He held a single garment bag over his arm and crossed the room in 4 strides. He set the bag on her desk and unzipped it. Inside was a midnight green column of raw silk, cut by hand, the color of moss at the base of an old oak. It had a square neckline. It had a structured bodice that did not crush her bust but lifted it. It had a high slit up the left leg that turned the dress into architecture. It had no compromise for her body. It was not a costume for a smaller woman. It was the dress for the woman Nora was already, and had been, for years, while no one was looking. You will wear this, Damiano said. He did not say please. You will wear it to every meeting. You will wear it to the gala. You will wear it on television. You will wear it into rooms where your father used to be welcome. He turned to Fabien Cross. You are no longer required. Cross left. Nora did not watch him leave. She tried on the dress. It fit the way a key fits a lock that has always existed inside the door. The first time Damiano Vitale let her see inside him was not in the penthouse, and not in a meeting, and not in the back of a car. It was in a service corridor of the Beaumont, around 3 in the morning, 2 weeks before the reopening. The building was empty. The construction crews had gone home. The new staff was not yet hired. Nora was sitting on a crate of Moroccan tile, eating a dry croissant, her feet up, her skirt pooled around her hips. She looked smaller than she was, because the crate was tall. She looked tired. She looked, Damiano thought, like the kitchen had finally emptied out, and she was the one left holding the kitchen up. You are up late, Signorina. I am always up late, Nora said. I have been up late since I was 19. He did not sit. He stood in the corridor with his coat over his arm, and Nora looked at him and saw, for the first time, the long white scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his jaw, and the way his jaw held tension even when nothing was happening, and the way his hands hung at his sides like tools that had not been allowed to put themselves down in a decade. My father died in 2014, he said, without preface. Cesare Bruno put the bomb in the car. I was 22. Nora did not speak. I have done things since then that you will not want to know about, and that I have not stopped doing. The man who lifted you off the carpet at the plaza is the same man, the same hands. Nora finished the croissant. She said, I did not ask you to be someone other than what you are. I asked you to let me in. He looked at her. The black ice was the black ice. Underneath it was something colder still, and underneath that was the wound, and underneath the wound was a man who had been holding a coastline in place for so long he had forgotten he was allowed to put his hands down. He sat, on the crate beside her. It was the first time Nora had ever seen Damiano Vitale lower his center of gravity in front of another human being. He did not speak. He sat, and she sat, and the corridor was quiet, and the city outside did not know that 2 people were, for the first time in a long time, sitting down. The first strike came 2 days before the Beaumont reopened. Damiano came to her office with a folio of financials. In the folio were the 7 shell companies Cesare Bruno maintained to handle the cash generated by his legitimate businesses, including 4 hotels, 2 car services, and a chain of florists that Nora, to her quiet horror, had used herself. I am not asking you to kill anyone, Damiano said. I am asking you to take the cash away. Nora read the folios. She wrote her own version of them. She submitted an aggressive bid for a chain of luxury catering venues, that flowed through New York and Boston, beating Bruno's people by exactly the kind of margin that bankers understand, and Bruno's people do not. She submitted a counterbid on the bridal consortium Bruno had been quietly assembling. She submitted a rate sheet for a private aviation partner that undercut his by 12%. She did all of this through legitimate channels, with contracts that had been drafted by lawyers Camilla Ashford would have chewed her own lip off trying to read. She did not lose sleep. She lost instead the part of herself that had believed a man of Cesare's stature could not be brought down by a balance sheet, a catering bid, and the steady hands of a woman who had been told, twice a week, that her size made her unsuitable for rooms she had been quietly running for a decade. Bruno's people began to call. Bruno's lawyers began to write. Bruno himself, in his large, oily voice, requested a meeting. Nora turned him down twice, once through a letter from her own attorneys, and once through a phone call during which she said, in a voice her mother would not have recognized, "Mr. Bruno, you do not yet have the standing to negotiate with me. When you have it, you may call again." He did not call again. The night of the Beaumont Gala, Nora was standing at the top of the grand staircase in the midnight green raw silk dress. Her hair was up, her shoulders were bare. The Cartier chain at her throat caught the chandeliers and threw light back into the room like something defiant. Damiano Vitali was across the lobby, talking to Enzo Marchetti, his right hand and enforcer, a former boxer who had replaced a man who had tried to leave the family at the wrong time. Enzo caught Nora's eye down the room, nodded once at her, and bowed his head a quarter inch, which was the closest Enzo Marchetti had ever come to kneeling before another human being. Vince Ricci was at the service entrance. He had been standing there for an hour without moving. Vince did not move. Vince was the second soldier, and the blunt instrument, and the man whose name you only heard once. Nora's mother, Margaret, was sitting in a wheelchair at the back of the room, attended by Grace Molina, who had been hired, against all professional odds, as Nora's deputy, and who had not yet realized she was now earning more than Gerald Thorne had ever paid her. Salvatore Conti, the family consigliere, was in the mezzanine, in a green velvet smoking jacket Nora had not known the family owned. Then Enzo's hand came up 2 inches off his sleeve. The signal. Nora saw it. She crossed the floor in 5 strides, the green silk catching the chandelier light along the line of her hips. Enzo materialized at her side, his hand already inside his jacket. Damiano was already in the corridor. So was Salvatore. "Renzo," Damiano said, "is no longer with us." Salvatore looked up. "Renzo," he said, "is with us. He is behind the bar. He has been with Cesare for 8 months." The sentence landed in Nora's chest like a fist. Renzo Fontana was Damiano's inside man. He had been one of the 4 men flanking Damiano at the plaza the night Nora was lifted off the carpet. He had been the one who picked up Nora's earpiece when it fell from Damiano's crushed hand. He had been standing, the entire time, in the same room as Nora's resurrection, and selling her out the entire time. "He wired the security plan for tonight to Cesare's people," Damiano continued. "He wired your mother's wheelchair location, he wired your hospital discharge schedule, he wired your access route, from the service corridor to the mezzanine. He has been selling your life, Signorina, for a price that did not have to be high." Nora did not speak for 5 seconds. She looked at Damiano. Damiano looked at her. The wound underneath the black ice opened, just slightly, and she saw it, and he knew she saw it. "What does Cesare want?" she said. Her voice was steady. Her voice was not at all the voice Damiano had first heard at the plaza. "He wants the Beaumont," Damiano said, "and the woman he now believes holds it. He has sent a man tonight." "A man named Kane," Salvatore said. "A specialist. A ghost, essentially." The chandeliers in the grand ballroom flickered once. Nora heard the absence of the string quartet, who had been replaced tonight by a pianist who had been told to keep playing until told otherwise. The pianist kept playing. Nora looked down at the green silk draped over her hips. She looked at Margaret in her wheelchair 50 feet away. She looked at Damiano, whose hands hung at his sides, the way tools hang at the sides of a man who knows, very precisely, what they are for. "Tell me the route," Nora said. The plan was simple. The plan was also insane. Nora Bennett was going to walk out of the service corridor as a decoy. She was going to walk the exact route Renzo had wired to Cesare. She was going to do it in the green dress, in her own body, in the body that Camilla Ashford had wanted to make smaller, because the body that Cesare Bruno had tried to ruin was the body he was most afraid of. Damiano did not like the plan. Damiano did not like the plan in the specific way that a man does not like fire when his daughter is inside it. "We are not doing this," he said. "You are not doing this," Nora corrected. "I am doing this. You are going to be where Cesare thinks you will be. You are going to be in the mezzanine. You are going to be in the trap he thinks he has set for you. And I am going to use my body, signore, my size 22 body, to walk through the door he is watching." Damiano looked at her for a long moment. He said, in a voice that was the absence of all command, the way a child's handwriting is the absence of all letters, "If you die in that corridor, I will drive my fist through Cesare Bruno's sternum and then through the wall of his house." "I am not going to die," Nora said. "I am going to be so big in that corridor that he cannot move around me." Damiano put his forehead against hers. Just for a moment. He did not kiss her. He put his forehead against hers, the way a man puts his head against a wall when the wall has finally spoken back. It went like this. Nora walked the service corridor with her hair down, the green silk sweeping her heels to either side. She was, Enzo had told her earlier, the largest human shape Cesare had been told would be on his gunman's route. The corridor was long, narrow, low-ceilinged, and lit by bulbs that flickered every 9th second. She reached the third alcove. The assassin was not visible. The assassin was, however, breathing. Nora did not turn her head. She said, in a low, conversational tone aimed at the wall, "Mr. Kane, I believe my dress is the wrong color for the wall behind me, which means you have not been briefed properly. My dress is the same color as the moss on my father's grave. Step into the light, please, so I can see the face of the man who is going to try to take me." 12 seconds of silence. Then a man in a charcoal suit stepped out of the shadow of the alcove. He had a silenced beretta leveled at her sternum. He had the dead eyes of a man who had been in this line of work for 20 years and had stopped counting the bodies. Nora lifted the bottom of the green silk. Underneath, she had sewn, with her own hands over the past 4 days, and at her own cost, a panel of bullet-resistant fabric. "You are going to want to shoot me in the chest," she said. "It will not work. You are going to want to shoot me in the head. Enzo Marchetti is behind you. I suggest you put the gun down." Kane's hand twitched. He did not shoot. Enzo caught him across the wrist. The beretta hit the floor. Vince caught him across the throat. Kane sank. Kane did not get back up. Nora stood in the corridor of the Beaumont Hotel in a dress that did not apologize for her body, in a building she had been told she was too big to run, breathing hard, hands shaking, alive. Damiano Vitale came around the corner 8 seconds later. He saw her. He saw she was alive. He crossed the corridor in 3 strides, took her face in both hands, and kissed her with the kind of force a man uses when he has just remembered, with the force of a heart attack, that he was constructed to protect something he had convinced himself he did not have. The kiss went on, and Nora gripped the lapels of his suit and pulled him closer. Underneath the kiss was the corridor, the green silk, her mother's wheelchair at the back of the room, the men in windbreakers, the architect of her father's ruin, and the soft, sour smell of a man who had almost ended her tonight with a single beretta. "I have him," Enzo called from behind them. "I have Renzo. I have Kane. I have the address, signore." Damiano released her. He nodded once at Enzo. Then he looked back at Nora. "Tonight," he said, "we finish it." They crossed Manhattan in the dark. They did not speak in the car. Nora watched the streetlights. Damiano watched Nora. Cesare Bruno lived in a townhouse on the Upper East Side, in a house he had bought from the estate of the same family he had once helped ruin. Nora had driven past the house as a child with her mother, on the way to the hospital where her father had officially died. They arrived at 3 in the morning. Damiano took the front door with Enzo. Vince took the back. Nora walked through the service entrance with Salvatore, who carried his green velvet smoking jacket like a man carrying a small, valuable sword. Cesare was in the study. He was sitting in an armchair, dressed in a silk robe. He had a glass of brandy in his hand. He had not been startled. He looked at Nora with the indulgent gaze of a man looking at a child who has wandered into the wrong party. "You came into my city, Signorina," he said, "and you brought my money home." Damiano was behind Nora. Enzo was at the door. Vince was at the window. Salvatore stood at Nora's left shoulder. Nora looked at Cesare Bruno and saw, for the first time in her living memory, the small, soft-handed, orange-peel-scented man who had ended her father's life. He was smaller than she had imagined. He was smaller than his crimes. He had been smaller, for 10 years, than the wreckage he had caused. "Signor Bruno," she said, "I am the daughter of Thomas Bennett." Cesare smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been seen, briefly, and had not liked it. "I know who you are, Bambina. I bought your father's house, his business, his—" "You bought my father," Nora said, "and then you killed him." She set a folio on his desk. It contained, in the order Damiano had arranged, the proof of Cesare's falsified manifests, the records of the warehouse arsonist, the paper trail of Renzo Fontana, the affidavit of the foreman who had been paid to lie, and the original, unredacted autopsy of Thomas Bennett, which listed, beneath the official cause of death, a small handwritten note Cesare's own family doctor had added at Cesare's request, and which Cesare had assumed would never surface. Nora looked at Cesare across the desk. "I forgive you, Signore," she said. "I do not forgive you for me. I do not forgive you for the man my father was. I forgive you because my mother is going to have her surgery on Wednesday, and forgiveness is a smaller burden than the alternative." Cesare stared at her. The folio he picked up with hands that were already shaking. He did not know what was in the autopsy note. He had not known his doctor had kept a copy. He had not known that Damiano had spent 10 years putting that copy somewhere Cesare would not look until tonight. He read the note. He looked up at Damiano. He looked up at Nora. He set the brandy down. He set it down the way a man sets down a glass when he has understood, finally, that he has been holding the wrong object for his entire life. He looked, in the next 30 seconds, like a man watching every light in his house go out, one at a time. "The men who took your father," Salvatore said, stepping forward, "are coming to your door in the morning. The FBI is coming to your door in the morning." "The FBI has the same folio, Signore." Cesare did not speak. Damiano spoke, in his death warrant voice. "You will sign the family business over, by sunrise, to Nora Bennett. You will sign the properties in Brooklyn and Miami. You will sign the warehouse my father built with the Vale wine money. You will sign them, Signor Bruno, with the same hand that signed my father's death. Or the FBI will receive the original, unredacted autopsy at 6 in the morning instead of 7. Cesare signed. The pen shook. The notary, Salvatore, witnessed. Enzo collected the documents. Vince collected the house keys. Damiano collected the silence out of the room and put it in his pocket. A week later, Cesare Bruno was arrested in Rome. A week after that, his eldest son was arrested in Buenos Aires. A week after that, his middle son was arrested in Miami, on a yacht whose paper trail Nora had annotated in her own handwriting. We return to the night where we began. The chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel are not the chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel tonight. They are the chandeliers of the Beaumont Hotel, in the mezzanine, where Nora Bennett is being crowned Director of Operations in the same raw silk moss-green dress she had worn the night she survived a corridor in her own body. She stands at the top of the grand staircase. The room below her is a sea of diamonds, tuxedos, and the kind of terror the rich carry with them into rooms where their money is no longer the loudest thing. Damiano Vitale stands to her left, in a black suit, with his hands at his sides. Enzo Marchetti stands beside him, his hand down his jacket. Vince Ricci stands by the service entrance, with a flower in his lapel. Salvatore Conti, in his green velvet smoking jacket, steps forward with a folded piece of paper and a long-stemmed white peony. He places the peony in Nora's hand. He places the paper, the original founding charter of the Bennett Import Company, recovered from the wreckage, signed by Thomas Bennett, redated by Salvatore under oath, witnessed by 2 men who did not live to see the morning, in her other hand. "By the authority of the Vitale family," Salvatore says, in a voice that has not been raised in 30 years, "and at the request of the head of this household, I restore, to Nora Bennett, the name, the charter, and the house of her father." Nora holds the charter. The room is silent. Camilla Ashford is not in the room. Camilla Ashford is in Nice, in a hotel whose reservations are no longer honored by any system Nora Bennett has built. Camilla's father is in a repayment plan administered through his family's New York attorneys, which is to say, his family's New York attorneys now report to Nora Bennett. Gerald Thorne is not in the room. Gerald Thorne is in federal custody awaiting trial. The catering company that was once Hawthorne and Vale has been merged, quietly, into the Beaumont. Renzo Fontana is not in the room. Renzo Fontana is in a jurisdiction that does not honor extradition. Preston Wilder, Nora's ex-fiancé, the man who had proposed to her in a restaurant in 2019 and had proposed, 6 months later, to a different woman half her size, in front of Nora's own mother, on a Sunday afternoon, in front of Nora's own mother, Preston Wilder, is standing at the bottom of the grand staircase tonight, holding a glass of champagne, because Nora had chosen, with a deliberate economy, not to exclude him from the invitation list. Nora looks down at Preston. Nora allows herself the smallest, quietest, most expensive smile of her life. She turns to Damiano. He is watching her the way the coastline watches a ship that has finally come home. "Not yet," he says, low enough that only she hears. "Tonight you are—" He does not finish. He does not need to. There are no more completed sentences between them. She kisses him. She kisses him with the entire weight of her body, in the green silk, in front of the 400 witnesses, in front of her mother, who is watching from the front pew, with a hand over her mouth and tears on her wrist. The kiss goes on, until Enzo, 6 minutes later, leans over and says, in a voice quieter than the silence of a held room, "Signorina, the toast." Nora releases him. She turns to face the grand staircase. She lifts the glass that Grace Molina has placed in her right hand without her noticing. She says, in a voice that has spent its entire life being told it was too loud, to the underestimated, "Everyone in the room drinks. Except, of course, those who no longer have anyone to drink with." The story does not end here. 3 months later, Nora Bennett marries Damiano Vitali in the chapel at the top of the Beaumont Hotel, while Salvatore Conti presides, while Enzo Marchetti hands her the ring, while Vince Ricci stands at the door with a flower in his lapel, and while Margaret Bennett watches from the front pew, her surgery behind her, walking now, on her own 2 legs. 3 years after that, Nora Bennett is named to a list of women reshaping the hospitality industry. The headline describes her as the woman who had been lifted off a carpet by a man who controlled most of the city and who had walked back into the room, later, on her own terms. The headline is wrong. She had not been lifted off the carpet. She had been seen, finally, for the first time, by the only person in the room capable of seeing her. And then she had become impossible, after that, to look away from. The moral, darker than the standard kind, is this. They underestimated a plus-size event coordinator who knew how to read a manifest. They underestimated the daughter of a man they had killed. They underestimated the woman who had been ignored, slowly and over years, into the specific kind of competence that does not flinch. The cost of that underestimation, when the invoice was tallied, was everything they had. Their names, their money, their children, their cities. If you have ever been the largest person in the room and the smallest voice, this story is yours. Hit like. Share it with a friend who has been told, by some version of a Camilla, or some version of a Gerald, or some version of a Preston, that her body was a problem her body owed her. Subscribe, comment below, tell us about the room that you have not yet stopped walking into.